Linked in my newsletter today is a New York Times examination of President Biden's record, which found that he and his closest advisors repeatedly rebuffed recommendations that could have addressed the border crisis faster and eased what became a potent issue for President Trump as he sought to return to the White House and justify the aggressive tactics roiling American cities today. Those are the words of Christopher Flavelle, a New York Times reporter who covers how President Trump is transforming the federal government, and he joins me now. Chris, thank you so much for being here. Early on in the piece, you say the Biden administration made two crucial errors. What were those errors?
Yeah, what we found was, number one, when they came into office, this is 5 years ago, they really didn't appreciate the scale of migration that was coming. They were focused specifically on people coming to the U.S. from Central America. It turned out to be much broader than that, just a huge volume of people that they were not thinking about and weren't ready for. Thing one. Thing two was misreading the politics of that, thinking, number one, that Hispanic voters maybe wouldn't react well to a greater focus on border enforcement, and so being wary of that. And then thinking that other voters, your typical American voter, wouldn't care that much about a border crisis or a border surge. Those collected sort of misunderstandings and bad bets did a lot to contribute to the policy decisions that got them where they were 4 years later.
This was a massive piece of work on your part. Obviously, a lot went into it. Talk to me about the approach.
Yeah, I tried to rely as much as I could on the people who were actually involved in these decisions. My thinking was that now that they've been out of office for a few months, they would have more freedom or feel more freedom to discuss what actually happened. And that worked out. Most people I talked to told me that they had not really shared their experience with reporters so far. And they almost felt like they were being unburdened, that it was sort of a relief to tell somebody what actually happened. And they all shared this sense that this file didn't go very well, and they were eager to explain why they thought it didn't go well. So after about 36 conversations, I had started to get a strong sense of where the overlap was and how to tell sort of the fairest and fullest story of what went wrong.
You know that among some red staters, there's this idea that it was all very deliberate and long-term, politically speaking, so as to repopulate and make sure that the Democratic Party is going to be safe in the future, i.e., these folks who are letting in today ultimately will join our party and provide us with a foundation. Did you see any evidence that there was a deliberative political strategy at play here?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'm so glad you raised that. That was one of the questions I went in with, just sort of keeping my ears open to see if there was any indication that that's what's going on. And look, it could be that the 36 or so people I talked to were all engaged in sort of a mass conspiracy. Seems unlikely. What I found was no one thought this went well, right? No one said, oh, this was a great plan, hurt us at the election, but it's going to help us down the road. People were terrified of this, right? Everyone thought this, almost everyone I talked to thought this was a policy disaster. They just couldn't figure out the right way to fix it. I didn't come across any evidence that anyone involved in these decisions was doing it deliberately. I think they all realized it wasn't going well. They just couldn't figure out what to do to fix the problem.
And you made reference to the fact that there was a perception, and you write about this, there's a perception that they might alienate the Hispanic community already here in the United States, here lawfully in the United States, if there were more aggressive postures taken toward the migration issue. And in the end, and by the way, that would have been my thought as well, but in the end, it seems as if Donald Trump benefited among Hispanics from his tone on this issue.
Yeah, the way that was explained to me was there was sort of a mistaken assumption that Hispanic voters in the U.S. were a bit of a bloc, that collectively they would respond negatively to tougher border enforcement. And the people I spoke with said over the course of those 4 years that Biden was president, they began to appreciate that obviously, in hindsight, obviously wasn't the case. These people did not all view this problem the same way. It depended where they lived, how long they'd been here, what country they came from. And the result was it was much more nuanced. And some Hispanic Latino voters saw a border surge as a real threat, especially those living in border communities. And I think in hindsight, that was one of the areas where the Biden people really just misunderstood the playing field they were operating on.
I also am reminded of Tony Hinchcliffe's joke about Puerto Rico told in that setting of Trump's return to New York at the Madison Square Garden rally just a couple of days before the election. And he said something off color about garbage in Puerto Rico. And many, myself, by the way, included, thought, well, that's going to hurt Trump within the Hispanic community. But that seems to have been a wash as well.
Yeah, look, I think one of the lessons I took away from this, and people I spoke with certainly felt this way, is it was just hard to know what the reaction would be to any given development, because this is really, really emotional, right? One thing that really rang true to me was people have such strong feelings, both policymakers and voters. And I think the Biden team just consistently misappreciated, underappreciated how people would feel and how strongly they would feel. And only in hindsight, which is why I did the story now, only in hindsight is it clear that some of those bets really went terribly wrong.
Christopher Flavelle is a New York Times reporter who covers how President Trump is transforming the federal government. Here's a graph from his reporting on the Biden administration's record on immigration. Quote, soon after being sworn in, Mr. Biden issued a 100-day pause on deportations. He drastically narrowed the categories of unauthorized immigrants targeted for arrest. He directed his government to stop building the border wall, a centerpiece of Trump's agenda. He suspended Remain in Mexico. He sent draft legislation to Congress to create a citizenship pathway for people in the country illegally. He kept Title 42 in place, but stopped using it to turn back children who crossed the border alone. There's a lot of detail in there. And then in the piece, which I hope everybody will spend the time to read, they'll be rewarded if they do, you go and you explain it. But the point I took away is there really were policy decisions that were made. It's not as if President Biden comes into office and just continues with the status quo. He did things in this regard that had a disastrous result.
Yeah, I think the way I found myself thinking of this is politicians respond to events, obviously, right? And I think the Biden team's approach to immigration and the border was very much forged in that specific moment of 2020, the tail end of the first Trump presidency, when many Americans and progressive Democrats in particular were feeling a great sense of outrage at how Trump approached this. And I think that reactive mindset really infused those initial decisions by the Biden team. I think if we look back in sort of a calculating way, it seems like the problem was that they stuck with it, right? Even when the public mood shifted, and it turned out that Americans didn't retain that sense of outrage, right? Over time, they moved back to the sort of the median on border stuff. And the Biden administration really for a long time stuck with that position that they had set during the campaign, and only over the course of sort of 2 or 3 years realized that those early positions were not in keeping with what Americans wanted. And I think what everyone shared was it took them too long to change course after it became apparent that was not where voters were anymore.
I think somewhere in the piece you used the words catastrophically slow. They were catastrophically slow to appreciate just how big a deal this was. And as I was reading your reporting, I was wondering, did anybody sound the alarm bell? And was this an emperor has no clothes kind of things where people are afraid? But you would think someone would be watching Fox News and saying, they're showing it on a loop. And maybe they're on to something with more than just Republicans by the resonance of this issue. Anybody that you found who went in and said to President Biden, Houston, we have a problem?
Very much so. So I think of the people who were working this issue in the White House at sort of two levels. You've got the experts, the subject matter experts who were advisors in the White House and across different agencies, and they were watching this and they were worried and they were saying we should change course with this policy or that policy, but that message just wasn't getting through. They would bring that back to top aides at the White House who would say, you know what, actually, let's let it go. And there really was, I'm told, a strong belief in Mr. Biden's inner circle that if they just waited a little bit, this border crisis would go away on its own, that there was no political upside in talking about it or focusing on it or calling it a crisis. If it just focused on other stuff, it would resolve itself. And as we now know, that was not accurate, but that really has been brought to my attention. So a core theme, at least for those first 2 years, there was a belief at the top of the administration that there wasn't any upside to really aggressively leaning into border issues. If they just waited, it would get better. And only after sort of 2 years or so, especially when Texas began busing migrants north, it had become clear that was not going to be a workable solution. But they just waited a long time to respond to those pressures.
Okay, but you're not giving me a name, and there's not a memo that was written that you uncovered. There's nothing we can point to where a person was sounding that alarm. That's what it sounds like to me.
Oh, no, I spoke with, I mean, look, the way this reporting sadly has to work is a lot of people wouldn't go on the record, but I'm convinced from my reporting that people did make very specific recommendations about a lot of steps that could have been taken. And the result was stasis. Right?
Okay.
People at the top kept on saying it's not going to work. The politics don't work. Just stop talking about it. And that was the position for 2 years or so.
Speaking of not going on the record, from your reporting, quote, 2 months into his term, Mr. Biden assigned Vice President Kamala Harris with reducing illegal migration, especially from Central America, by working on the root causes of that migration. Republicans labeled Ms. Harris the president's border czar, but none of the former officials who spoke to the Times described her as a central decision maker on border policy. A spokeswoman for Ms. Harris did not respond to requests for comment. What a missed opportunity. Whatever her record might be, I was really disappointed to see that she wouldn't speak to you and defend herself or explain, I really didn't have a significant role.
Yeah, look, as a reporter, clearly my approach is I want to get everyone's take as much as I can. I couldn't speak with the former vice president, and I couldn't speak with the former president. Mr. Biden's staff declined to put him on the phone with me. So I still don't have a sense of what they thought. It comes from the people around them who were interacting with them. But yeah, to your point, the vice president was not identified to me as a significant decision maker, which is a bit ironic given that she was tarred with this sort of border czar thing. I think the deeper question here, and I hope future historians find a way into it, is the president himself was a bit of a cipher on this. The people I spoke with who interacted with him really told me they didn't have a good sense of what he believed and what his goals were, what his hangups were. Everyone says he seemed to not really want to discuss it. This was not an issue he felt comfortable with, that he wanted to engage in. And I think that probably at a personal level, to some degree, helps explain why his administration didn't engage more aggressively. At an individual level, it seemed as though the president himself just didn't like this topic and didn't want to spend time talking about it.
Just two more things, if you'll indulge me, and thanks for being so gracious with your time. It's a serious piece of reporting, and I really hope that people will read what Christopher Flavelle from the Times has published about the Biden administration record relative to migration. So the deal. I know that some listening to this conversation, and they'll probably call me when you're gone, and they're going to say, yeah, okay, but in the end, Trump put the kibosh, Trump as a candidate put the kibosh on any prospect of a deal that Biden was then negotiating with the Congress, to which I'll probably say two things can be true. The Biden administration waited too long to put that deal together. And yes, it's true. Trump put his thumb on the scale and he hasn't presented any kind of a pathway ever since Trump 2.0 began. But I want to hear your thoughts. I know what they are because I read this, but relative to the lack of a deal by the White House and Congress on Biden's watch, what happened?
Yeah. Look, one of the points I make in the story is this overarching question is huge. Why did the president wait so long to act on his own? And the answer, from all accounts, is he really did want Congress to go first. He had a sort of institutional belief as a longtime former senator that this was Congress's job. He wanted to give Congress every chance. But as I reported in the piece, that deal that ultimately fell through last February, of course, blamed on President Trump. President Trump wrote on social media that Republicans should reject this deal, and they did. But what Senator James Lankford told me, the lead Republican negotiator from Oklahoma, he said that it's not just Mr. Trump, that also Mr. Biden waited to get involved in that deal. It's almost as though the White House didn't want to be associated with that deal until they had to, and until it was obviously to their benefit. And Senator Lankford's take was, if the White House had gotten involved more aggressively and faster, that deal could have been resolved faster, and it could have worked, right? It could have passed before Mr. Trump went through the primaries and had the sort of political pull to sink that deal. So it's not, certainly Democrats and Mr. Biden have said the fault lies with Mr. Trump. And what I learned in this reporting was it's not quite that straightforward. Also, Mr. Biden could have gone before that, right? He didn't have to wait for Congress to try to reach a deal. And the account I got there was they talked about it. This question of using unilateral power from the White House to close the border was discussed much sooner than 2024. And every time the president and his aides said, no, let's wait. Let's sort of effectively bet on Congress. And again, with hindsight, we know now that was a really bad bet, but they kept on sticking with it.
And finally, the number one reacted to comment appended to your story was from Nancy. So I'll read what Nancy said and then you can respond to it. Quote, all he had to do was follow Obama's example. The myopic stupidity of his inner circle still boggles the mind. I saw Biden was losing on this issue by early 2023, and I'm basically a nobody out there in the hinterland. How could they be so wrong? And I also could see, Trump or no Trump, that the GOP would eviscerate the Dems on this issue and win. Border security is national security, and that's a president's number one responsibility to his country. How do Dems not understand this? Their stupidity gave us Trump. I voted for Biden. I thought he did an admirable job in many ways, but this oversight changed our whole country for the worse. It's tragic and almost unforgivable. You say what to Nancy Brown?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use that same language, but definitely the people I spoke with who worked on this echoed some version of that sentiment of, wow, we really got this wrong. It's just worth noting really quickly, this was not just a garden variety problem, right? This was a really unprecedented scale of migration. Number one, there was no guidebook. There was no playbook here. And number two, the people who worked on migration and border stuff under the Biden administration, many of them worked on it under Obama. And I think their view was, this is carefully managed. We can handle it. And they just didn't realize how fast it was moving. So I don't know if in hindsight it was just a lack of foresight. It was hopefulness. It was a dedication to trying to appeal to their own values, but no one I spoke with rejected the premise that this went wrong. I think the real question is, how do the Democrats take the lessons from the Biden years on immigration and the border and use that the next time, and what will their policy be? And I got the sense from this reporting that Democrats have not decided what they as a party believe on border and immigration issues. So that's like the thing I will now watch, and I think everybody will watch. What do they take away from this, and how do they avoid a similar sort of quagmire the next time around?
Well, nicely done. Thank you so much for your time and for the work that went into this piece. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That's Christopher Flavelle from the New York Times. He reports from Washington on immigration on this issue. By the way, so significant and massive is his unraveling of this onion that it warranted a follow-up piece from him where he summarizes, here are the 4 takeaways that you need to know. And they are as follows. 1, before Biden took office, advisors warned that his approach could lead to chaos at the border. 2, the Biden team misread the politics of immigration. 3, the White House rejected pleas to help Democratic cities cope with migrants. And 4, Biden kept waiting for Congress to act, a strategy that failed. Call in reaction to what you've just learned based on that reporting. I'm at the usual number, 855-486-1776. 85, by the way, in my view, 2 things can have truth in them as usual. It's not all one and it's not all the other. I cannot defend the porous borders that existed under Biden. I do appreciate the fact that they were working out a deal with the Congress that would have provided some type of pathway for people who are here, because I think that's necessary. I don't know. I had this debate at my book club the other night. This came up at book club the other night, and when I was asked to articulate my position, I said, I don't know where the Mendoza line is. It's not 4 years. It's not 5 years. Maybe it's 7 years. Maybe it's 10 years. In my view, relative to the pathway to citizenship, and maybe it's not citizenship. In fact, it's probably not citizenship if you take this path. If I have the magic pen in my hand, I'm saying if you've been here for X years, it's 7 or north of 7, and have led an otherwise exemplary life after your original sin, kept your nose clean, worked, paid taxes, family, yeah, I'm not looking to ship you out if you're the short order cook in Jersey. So the Biden administration, much more in sync with me on that. They let this situation become a disaster. I appreciate the fact that the border has closed under Trump. I think that was necessary. But now here comes the criticism of Trump and the Republicans. They have zero interest in any kind of a pathway. Why not some type of a permanent green card for people who get clean with the system? They don't get to vote. You want to become a citizen? Okay, that's something different. You might have to leave and come back, except it's not going to be wink, wink. There'll be some realistic prospect that you really can come back. If I had the resources, that's a story I'd love to investigate. Remember when the deal was, we'll give you $1,000 and a plane ticket, or maybe it was a plane ticket or $1,000. I don't know. If you will voluntarily self-deport. Did anybody take that deal? And where do they stand in the immigration line? I'd love to know the answer to that. I don't know. I went looking for it. I couldn't find it. Hey, gang, thanks so much for these telephone calls. Christopher Flavelle was just here talking about his reporting in the New York Times about the Biden migration policies. Like, what went wrong? And clearly something massive went wrong. He unspools it in this piece that I've linked to in today's newsletter at Smerconish.com. Hi, Rachel. You're in upstate New York. What are you thinking?
Hi, Michael. I just wanted to know, where was the press in all this? I mean, you have investigative reporters whose job it is to hold the president's feet to the fire on issues that are hot topics. And I don't know that, and you may have answered this already, so I apologize if you did. Where was the CNN and the CBS and all those people?
So Fox News covered it extensively. I mean, if you watch any amount of Fox, you would have seen it on a loop. I don't think that the other outlets, give me a little protection here, Rachel, okay? I don't think that the other outlets covered it to the extent they should have. I will say this, and this will be a reminder, and thank you, Rachel, in the debate, which was a CNN debate, Dana Bash, Jake Tapper, this was like one of the critical moments. Do we have this? This is one of the critical moments of the debate when Jake Tapper poses a question to President Biden. Let's listen.
I'll veto it. He'll sign it.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to the issue of immigration and border security. President Biden, a record number of migrants have illegally crossed the southern border on your watch. Overwhelming border states and overburdening cities such as New York and Chicago, and in some cases causing real safety and security concerns. Given that, why should voters trust you to solve this crisis?
Because we worked very hard to get a bipartisan agreement that not only changed all of that, it made sure that we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border with the number of border police there are now. We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. By the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. In addition to that, we find ourselves in a situation where when he was president, he was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go. What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we can do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
Man, what a word salad that was. I'm reminded of, do you remember back in the 2020 cycle, which President Biden ultimately was nominated in and wins the presidency, but do you remember my critique of his debate performance when I would say, when I hear him speak, I can picture the room where 5 or 10 people are all telling him, you got to say this, and you got to say this, and you got to say that. And then he sits there trying, you can like see the wheels spinning in his head.
And I remember you saying one thing.
Just tell us one thing.
One thing.
Forget all those people. Just tell us one thing. For example, the one thing could have been, Jake, I regret that we've not been stronger in our enforcement of porous borders. I think recently we've gotten it together. The numbers reflect that. And this bipartisan deal will really put us ahead of the curve. And I'm working hard to get it passed.
And I'm also reminded, because I just played that and saw the split screen, that Trump at some points in that debate just looked completely confused. Like, what is he even saying?
Yes.
Different from how Trump usually looks, which is, I'm about to pounce.
Yeah.
Truly confused.
Right.
With like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think this may have been, I'm not sure, but this may have been one of the exchanges where Trump actually had a follow-up and said, I have no idea what he just said. And he wasn't the only one. Chris, you are in Stratford, Connecticut, thinking what as you're listening to this conversation? Hello, Chris.
Hello?
Let's do it.
Oh, no, am I losing you?
Okay, I'm going to put you on hold, sort him out or not. George, you're in Union County, New Jersey. What did you most want to say?
Hey, Michael, good morning.
Hi.
Hey, listen, this topic is very close to my heart. I've been in this country for 50 years, and I came here legally. And I just can't believe that 50 years later, this topic still continues to be a conversation, that none of our elected officials have the nerve to make this a bipartisan issue, to make it legal for those that really aspire to come to America to become citizens or become legal residents. A large part of our GDP is contributed by our immigrant population. What's wrong with our politicians?
So you heard what I said a few minutes ago. I'm not going to repeat it. I'm not letting everyone who came here illegally stay if theoretically you could control it. How many years would you say a person needs to have been here, been lawful, productive, family-oriented kind of thing? Fill in that equation however you see fit. Well, what's the number? Because it's not somebody who came within the last 4 or 5 years. What is the number?
Well, to come here legally, obviously there are certain procedures and steps to take to come here legally. But
right.
I think if you're here 5 to 7 years max, paying your dues, paying your taxes, keeping your nose clean, walking on the right side of the law, you should have a step forward or a step ladder, if for lack of a better term, to become a legal resident.
Right.
Why can we do this as a United States of America? I just can't.
Okay, so your number of years is somewhere between 5 and 7.
5 and 7.
5 and 7. Okay, this could be a great poll question someday. I recognize many people are going to say, it could be 100 years. I don't care. I had this dialogue with Greg Bovino, who is the border official that now, he started in L.A. and they've used him in Chicago. I think I saw him in New Orleans last week, all over the place. And I tried to have this dialogue. Well, I did have this dialogue with him. We just don't see eye to eye. And he said, no, everyone who came in here is a lawbreaker, essentially denying someone else opportunity, and that someone else might be an American whose job they're taking.